Becoming a pilot. That's probably something that every little kid wants to be during his or her life, right after a fireperson or a veterinarian. Indeed, everyone can always be grateful to the people who are able to fly us unscathed from point A to point B, and sometimes even around the world. Most remain simply normal, however there are a few that have gone on to become very famous people. Now we'll show you 5 pilots whose stories you should absolutely know about. Let's go. Number 5. Alastair Åkesson. It's really incredible what happened to the pilot Tim Lancaster in 1990 during a flight on British Airways from Birmingham to Malaga. Shortly after the machine had been started, the entire left cockpit window was ripped out of its anchorage and sucked the pilot out who had just completed takeoff. Fortunately, his feet got caught in the steering column, so he was not completely taken out of the cockpit. When a member of the flight crew, Nigel Ogden, heard the loud bang, he immediately ran to the cockpit and was able to keep the pilot secured there. The co-pilot, Alastair Åkesson, was still strapped in, but had to bring the aircraft under control since parts of the cockpit door were now higher than the control panel, and various problematic objects were flying throughout the cockpit. Eventually, he initiated descent and was able to get to a height with enough oxygen. He deliberately avoided putting on his own mask in order to be able to communicate with his crew. While other crew members were helping to hold the pilot, Åkesson dropped an emergency call. Eventually, he was passed on to the next airport in Southampton. There, he was able to bring the plane safely to the ground. During the entire time, the pilot was hanging about 2/3 out of the machine, and upon landing, he regained consciousness. That's a miracle that there hadn't been any casualties in this incident. Number 4. Santiago Borja Lopez. This Ecuador Airlines pilot has actually done nothing particularly incredible, like protecting his passengers from terrorists or sacrificing his life for someone else. Nevertheless, it's worthwhile to talk about him, because he gives us an incredible insight into the world above the clouds. In his flights over the South American continent and the rest of the world, he has in fact repeatedly witnessed breathtaking natural spectacles, from amazing flashes of lightning to imposing cloud formations or even bright stars in the night sky. If this pilot's on duty, he can't help it and often pulls out his camera. What he captures not only looks spectacular but also reveals a new angle, which we could never get from down here. Number 3. Chesley Sullenberger. If Tom Hanks and Clint Eastwood think you're honorable enough for a film, then you can give yourself a heroic pat on the back. Because Chesley Sullenberger gave us not only a global breakthrough on the social media platform Twitter, but also an especially exciting and amazing emergency landing. When US Airways Flight 1549 on its way to Seattle on January 15, 2009 rose into the air, everything seemed fine at first. But once it reached a height of 975 meters, the pilots reported to air traffic control that both engines had failed. The reason for this technical failure was that wild geese had been sucked into the engines, which is also called bird strike. At first, LaGuardia Airport ordered the plane to return, but a little later they reported that they no longer were capable of doing so, and the plane would need to land in the Hudson River. And indeed, Sully managed to land the machine by ditching it into the Hudson River, and all 155 people on board were able to survive. The quote-unquote miracle on the Hudson ended up not only in the news, but was hotly debated, especially on Twitter. Here, the first photos and details had gotten around much faster than TV stations and newspapers. So this event not only marked the high point in Sully's life, but also in the success of Twitter. Number 2. Eric Moody. A particularly spectacular incident occurred on a British Airways flight in 1982. The Boeing 747 with the registration GBDXH flew from London Heathrow across the world to Auckland, New Zealand. They made stops in Bombay, Madras, Kuala Lumpur, Perth, and Melbourne. A long journey that ended not so lightly, because south of the Indonesian island of Java, the first officer and flight engineer first noticed something unusual. They had the impression that light visibility out of the windshield was changing, and so they put on the fasten seatbelt sign as a precursor. However, then they began to see smoke forming. Back then, cigarette smoking was still allowed, so the pilots asked people to stop. However, when the smoke became even denser, the passengers alerted the crew. What the passengers and crew had no idea they were flying past in the dark of night was a massive cloud of volcanic ash being thrown from an eruption of a volcano, Gunung Galunggung. Shortly after that, all 4 engines failed. They declared the emergency to air traffic control, but the Jakarta area controlled got the message wrong and assumed that only engine number 4 had broken down. Many among the passengers resigned themselves to disaster, some of them even began to formulate farewell letters to loved ones, but the pilot Eric Moody tried everything he could to sort things out. Communication with Jakarta was difficult, so there was no radar guidance he could use. However, the captain and his crew finally managed to start the engines again. They ended up landing with 3 engines in Jakarta, and until the arrival had no knowledge of the circumstances of the engine failure. Really hats off for so much professionalism and courage. And finally, number 1, Scott Brazelton. Unfortunately, the pilot Scott Brazelton couldn't spend so much time with his newly born son because he was deployed in the Persian Gulf. So he decided to make good use of his time at home and made some great plans. He built his 3-year-old son a roller coaster in the garden. The boy had seen a similar thing during his visit to Disneyland and taken a strong liking to it. So Scott did exactly this and brought him home something fun. Although he knew it could be a fairly complicated project, he saw it as an experiment, and above all an opportunity to spend more time with his family. Scott appreciated the opportunities that a career in the military had given him, but on the other hand left him little time at home. So he saw his duty to bring together all members of the family into a joint project. Well, the experiment succeeded, and the result was a real hit on the internet. Okay folks, well I hope you enjoyed learning about these fascinating pilots and their stories. If you like this, why not check out another video right here or subscribe to our channel for more. Until next time, bye!